for many of us, Arno Michaelis just squeaks through as one of God's kind of people. And that's only because he changed his evil ways in the nick of time. Despite the terrible hate that he once demonstrated in his life, we conclude that Arno, as one of God's sheep, is sufficiently worthy to have been found. But here's the question. Would we or could we say the same thing about Wade Michael Page, the temple gunman, had he not taken his own life during the incident? I want you to imagine, as possible jurors in Wisconsin, how would you have voted if asked to consider whether or not to hand Page the death penalty? In our gospel reading this morning, the Pharisees clearly signal the message that folks like tax collectors and the like, even drug dealers, muggers, white supremacists, are not God's kind of people. From their perspective, sinners such as these are lost to God. They are therefore unwelcome among the righteous, because the only thing these greasy folks could possibly accomplish is mess up the already found and saved folks. Indeed, the religious establishment views those other people as being quite literally lost causes. So much so that it seems never to have occurred to the Pharisees to reach out to sinners. The Pharisees seem to think that the good and righteous people like themselves, God could not fail to love because they're just so morally attractive. But tax collectors and all those other undesirables, well, that's a horse of a different color. God could not possibly love them, could he? No matter what. So, if you fit into the category of a lost cause, and then you heard Jesus tell stories about how God is a champion of the lost, well, it must have sounded like good news, like gospel. I wonder sometimes which set of ears most characterizes people in church today. I've often wondered this. Does the gospel sound wonderful to us only when we see ourselves as the target of God's grace and joy and happiness? Really? Or do we rejoice when we see others getting caught up in the divine embrace? Even if those others are people very unlike us. Maybe even people we ourselves do not particularly care for or are able to relate to. Do we feel as joyous? The reason I ask is because if we feel joy over the salvation of others, quote unquote, is it because we know that when you get right down to it, we're all the same? Lifelong church members and newly saved drug addicts? Conservative Christians with a backlog of moral virtue, and more progressive folks whose views don't always jibe with our own? Are we not all the same at the end of the day? Isn't it true that we all need the same amount of grace in order to be found and then return to the sheepfold? I'm convinced that if for once we stopped thinking about us and them, maybe we would arrive at a day when we all have just one set of ears. One set of ears with which to hear parables like the one I read this morning. Ears highly adept at picking out the tune of sheer joy that describes the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ. One set of ears. Wouldn't that be something? Were it not for the wonderful grace of God, I'm convinced we would all be sheep adrift in the world and in danger of perhaps dying somewhere in some God-forsaken wilderness. But when we properly understand and savor what God's grace has done for us, I think it becomes contagious. I think it's so contagious that we want everyone to know this kind of sensation so that they can get in on it. Have you ever felt that? So joyous that you found your way back with God's help into the sheepfold, you can't wait to tell someone else. What a feeling. It's pitch black in the forest now. But young Johnny can see the dancing light of a flashlight in the distance. And he can hear his scout leader calling his name. In a town far away, young Angela Baker remains stuck in the doorway to the abortion clinic. She's only mildly startled when her mother caresses her shoulder. Pardeep Kalika and Arno Michaelis, the grieving son and the repentant racist, continue to preach their message of peace. Wade Michael Page, the Sikh gunman, is dead. Alan Roberts continues to wander the streets of his small, drug-induced world, while God and Alan's mother continue to look for their son. Amen.